Hello. Okay, now we got things rolling. And you're here. I think you kind of figured out the Twitch thing is kind of weird. Not a lot of people do the Twitch thing. So, but it is a different kind of audience. And also, this is all over the world. So sometimes I know one person stops by as Moron. He's from Australia. So, for him, the time difference is even bigger than yours and mine. And so why don't you tell us about yourself, what you do, and what you're passionate about?
Okay, yeah. So I'm Lauren. I'm a graduate student at the University of Tulsa, which is in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And I do biogeochemistry research. So I'm a geoscience graduate student, and I study the biogeochemistry of metal cycling in rivers. So I look at lichens, mussels, river water, groundwater, and sediment, and sort of see how metals migrate throughout those different things and how that relates to like human health and aquatic ecosystem health, and even how that might change depending on like a changing climate. And I'm really passionate about water quality and water availability, at least in Oklahoma as well as globally.
And I think it's interesting that you would think someplace like Oklahoma wouldn't really need to be concerned with water, right? It's not a desert.
Yeah.
Right? It's not someplace it's not like Flint, Michigan that has a known water problem, with metals. But I guess based on what you do, Oklahoma has its own unique problems that you're interested in.
Yeah. We have different impairments kind of ranging from categories of like metals and then bacteria like E. coli or Enterococcus bacteria, as well as physiochemical parameters. So like some water systems are impaired due to dissolved oxygen, like they're not being an adequate amount to support ecosystems, and pH. So the pH is either too low or too high to support aquatic life, which I thought was really interesting in finding that out.
Now I'm making a guess that some of this water quality problem is due to agriculture.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Especially in northeast Oklahoma. Okay. There's a lot of large-scale poultry farms, so that contributes a lot of phosphorus and nitrogen in rivers that pose a lot of health problems to the aquatic life, as well as residents who utilize the water over there.
Yeah, I'm just guessing because I don't know much about Oklahoma, but I do know they have agriculture there. Farms, ranches, things like that. So I was right.
Yeah.
So, I think, a lot of people know that you do research on the rivers to find out their health. And I know I have done some research back in my undergraduate days with benthic invertebrates, right, as a biology student. And you go in and you sample and you get, to see if it's healthy or not based on what lives there. What do we like to see when we're Oklahoma or anywhere else in a river to know it's healthy?
We like to see an abundance of aquatic life. So that could include seeing different insect species, to seeing different fish species, to also seeing different mussel species. And mussels are like really important to find in our water systems because they're really good indicators of river health, because they're very sensitive to any change within a river system. So if you can find mussels in your your river, then that's a good indicator that your river is doing okay. But if we start to see a mussel die off or the species start to decrease, then that kind of gives an indicator that the river is probably not as healthy as it could be.
And so what do the mussels do for the river? I'm thinking that they kind of like clean it. You know, they have like these functions of like cleaning. Is that true?
Yeah, yeah. So mussels are actually nicknamed livers for rivers because like human livers will filter our blood and remove out toxins from our blood, and mussels will filter the river water, and so they'll take in metals like pharmaceuticals and other things that are in the river and accumulate them in their tissue and shells they grow over time, and so they're removing them out of the water and helping maintain the water quality, which is really cool.
So they're getting all these bad things out of the water. So I
Yeah.
shouldn't eat them then, because then I would be eating bad things,
Yeah, it's
right?
probably not recommended to eat a lot of mussels.
I will say lake
Just
mussels
because.
I've used to eat a lot of back in I used to go up and camp in the Adirondacks with my grandfather. We would go out and we'd collect these mussels out of the lake bottom, and then we would cook them up and we would eat them. Um, but that was a long time ago in the Adirondacks. It
Uh,
was nice and clean, but river not so much. Um, I know you were talking earlier today. You were skyping with the classroom on the Delaware River, right?
yeah, yeah,
Okay, and I live very close to the Hudson River. Right, I think a
okay,
lot of cities are of course located on rivers. Duh, right? Most towns are located on streams or rivers as well. Um, and so, you know, my experience with rivers is mainly the Hudson River, which for a long time was known for being polluted with PCBs and other bad things. Um,
yeah.
but recently, in the lakes in the region and other freshwater, we've had a problem with zebra mussels, as I'm sure you're familiar with, an invasive species. So mussels aren't always good in this case.
Yeah, yeah. So the zebra mussels are like they still do the same processes as native mussels as far as like the water goes, but they're wiping out the native mussel species. So that's posing a problem because in some cases the native mussel species are becoming like threatened due to the zebra mussels. So it's kind of wiping out native mussel communities, which we don't want to see happen.
No, we do not. Because from what I understand, what you were talking about, like biodiversity is key. We see that in so many situations in life. Right? When we talk about maintaining a healthy planet, a lot of it comes down to that biodiversity. What are some things that we can do to help maintain biodiversity of our rivers?
Um, I would say like pick up trash. Like if you see any type of trash along like a river, or even on a roadway, because many times you're anything that's kind of littered out is going to make its way into a water system. And so if you see that, if you pick it up, then that can help at least mitigate pollution from trash. And even watching when you use pesticides and certain fertilizers, because if you utilize those and then there's like this big rain that comes in, then all that runoff is going to make its way into a water system, which is not going to help the aquatic life necessarily. Um, and even just like documenting a river, like if you're going to go recreate in it or visit our water system, like if you notice anything that kind of odd, if you report it to like your environmental quality department or if you just like document it, all those things can help um, keep biodiversity and keep track of that.
Cool, cool. Now I'm going to digress from the science for a little bit. And what makes a person passionate about mussels? I mean, what is it in your past that made you suddenly go, ah, I love mussels? You know, I can see like some people are like, I love cats, or, you know, even I love sloths or whatever, but, you know, it's a little more esoteric to have this passion for like mussels. And so, what kind of got you where you are?
Um, so kind of undergraduate research, I started out in high temperature geochemistry and dealing with like volcanoes and mid ocean ridges and basically anything to do with high temperature. And then went from that into low temperature geochemistry and looking at rare earth elements, which are kind of like the lanthanide series on the periodic table, and looking at those in carbonate and kind of how they will substitute for calcium. And that led into what I'm doing for my thesis with the biogeochemistry of rivers. And because mussel shells are composed of calcium carbonate, and we kind of found that metals can kind of substitute for that as well. So that's kind of how I got into at least the mussel side of it. And then when I found out how much mussels do for the ecosystem that they're in and how many different services they provide, and how even though they're kind of really small, like they're really just like the size of people's hands, really, they do so much for such a large water system. And that was really fascinating to me, that there's like little small but mighty organisms.
Right. Like you don't really think of them as being that important, but they are.
Yeah. Like I had no idea what they did before doing my thesis, and what I found out, like, I had no idea. Like I've been collecting shells before, just seeing even like mussel shells on the banks of rivers, and I had no idea like how important they are and what they actually do.
So you started from like a complete, not like ignorance of mussels, but you went from this geochemistry to mussels. I always find it interesting when I talk to scientists and people doing research, how usually it's circuitous. It's not some people it's like, I'm going to study this, and then they go and they do it. Usually it's like, I'm going to come in this direction, then, oh, look at this over here, this shiny thing. And then they get completely distracted, and go some other direction, which, it's sometimes difficult for me to convince students, at a young age, that no, you don't have to decide what you want to be yet or what you want to do. Exactly. I mean, it's okay to go on some detours and kind of figure things out. Do you have any suggestions for people in terms of that? Because you kind of went through that yourself.
Yeah. I even did a even bigger turn before that. So like in high school, I grew up playing sports, so I was determined that my career was going to be something related to athletics, just because I was like, I do sports, that's going to be my career. I'm going to do like sports medicine or something related to athletics to keep me in that area. And when I took a sports medicine class in high school, I hated it. And I was like, well, this sucks, because now I don't know what I'm going to be doing like in college. And college applications were coming up, and I happened to get into gardening around that same time. And I was really interested in how the plants were indicators of what's sort of in your soil and maybe what you need to add to sort of help the plants grow more healthily. And so that kind of got me into geoscience and got me interested in the field of science that I'm kind of doing now. And I just tell people, I'm like, try it out. If you have an interest in something, or even if you don't think you do, like try it out before you need to full on commit to it, just because it'll give you a good indicator about whether you like it or not. And that's kind of one of the reasons I tried to do undergraduate research, just to sort of see, like, do I like this field, or like what field do I like? And it's kind of where I feel the most comfortable in, or most like excited in. And don't be afraid to try new things either, because I was terrified of chemistry and biology, and now I'm doing both, and geology. So.
I think at a certain point you realize, when you're even going to a sports medicine kind of fields, you're like, oh, this is science, and I think there's a certain naivety that you have, especially in 8th grade. I teach mainly 8th graders, where they're like, oh, I want to go into nursing or whatever. I'm like, oh, you want to go into the sciences? No. Like you do realize there's a lot of biology involved in being a veterinarian or a nurse or working in a zoo or any of these things. I'm like, which shouldn't dissuade you, it should embolden you, right? It should, empower you to do more. And so, I even, encourage, students to, if you don't have to know what you want to do, if you kind of at least have an idea, that's good. But I mean, even in science, you probably know people that were doing science and then it's like, oh, a law degree.
Oh yeah.
And you're like, how does that even happen? And it's like, well, whatever. Usually especially when you're younger, it is easier. When you get older and into your career, it's harder to switch paths again, but people still do it, which I find amazing.
Yeah.
And I was looking through your resume CV, and a few things caught my eye. What languages do you speak?
I know it's Spanish, French, Mandarin, Chinese, Ancient Greek, and then English. But I will say that speaking them is more rough than reading in those languages for me. So I
it's
prefer
the ancient
reading.
Greek that really caught my eye. It's like, how many people can read ancient Greek? I mean, was this something you had to do in like a Bible class or something? I mean, or was this something that you're just, I'm going to learn ancient Greek, and you went on YouTube and you're like, oh, fun, okay.
Yeah, no, I just like learning languages. I started out taking Spanish in middle school and really liked learning the language, and also really liked learning about the culture and sort of how the language was derived. And then when I got into high school, we had to take other electives, and they were teaching French as well as Spanish. And I was like, why not do both? Because I can learn another language. And then moved to Oklahoma, and they were offering Chinese, and I like art a lot, and so I actually found that I really liked Chinese because it was sort of like drawing, so you got to like draw out the different characters, and then the language too was completely different, at least grammatically, compared to French and Spanish and English, and that really fascinated me. And then ancient Greek, it was kind of a why not class? Like, why not take it and learn about it and see how I like it? So yeah, no, I like languages and learning the culture of languages. So.
Obviously,
I find it fun. Yeah,
well,
yeah.
They also say that once you learn like
me.
one language and then you learn a second language, like it just gets easy. Your brain is kind of able to just absorb more languages, which I find fascinating. I could speak German. That was like the only other language I really learned. My sister was like the language nut. She could speak, German, Czech, Russian, probably a couple others too. So she went that route.
Nice.
There's that aptitude and love for languages. I know. I just saw that and I'm like, that is interesting for sure. I actually had the question this year. One of my students was like, why do we have to learn Spanish? Like, what do you mean, why do you have to learn Spanish? You should know another language. And like, I'm never going to use it. I'm like, maybe you won't with that attitude.
Yeah, I found it actually helpful, at least in doing like science communication and outreach, because at least knowing other languages and knowing sort of like the culture too of like the specific countries of origin of the language, I found it's made it a lot easier to communicate with more diverse audiences and sort of communicate stuff that I'm passionate about to people. So,
well, definitely in the amount of Greek that's in science, of course, comes in handy as well.
Oh yeah.
I'm surprised you didn't dive into Latin too. I mean, you probably know that just by French and Spanish. If you know French and Spanish, Italian's kind of like, yeah, I got that, which means you pretty much have Romanian and Latin at the same time. So,
yeah.
Which is interesting. I could always read Italian. It's very easy to read, and kind of get the idea of what's happening. But of course, I couldn't speak it or understand it if it was spoken. But I could read it when I went to Italy and be like, oh yeah, I know what that means, because it's all derived from Latin, of course. So, which French always just made no sense to me. I'm like, this is I don't know, but
yeah.
Now
they get kind of muddled though, and I'll kind of like sometimes I'll just speak like a combination or write out like a combination of all of them. I'm like, wait, that is not right. Like,
yeah. Well, so my wife grew up speaking Spanish, and then we went to Germany a couple times, and she learned some German, and then of course she went to like say something in either Spanish or German, but could only think of that word in the other language, and then once you get that stuck in your head, you're like, I can't think of what it is.
Oh yeah, I've done that so many times. I'm like, I know it, but I was thinking about it in the wrong language.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and like my first language that I spoke was Spanish, which like shocks people. So my first words and phrases were all Spanish, and then learned English afterwards.
Well, there you go. That explains a lot. From an early age, I went to like a German kindergarten, so that was kind of like similar. Kind of certain things will always be in my head. I'll never be able to, forget parts of that language. So there you have it, everybody. If you want to get into science, learn another language for sure. It does help. It does. It definitely helps. And I think sometimes you like, oh, I have to take that, 6 credits of foreign language in college or whatever. It's like, well, there is a reason for it. It is helpful, especially the international flavor that science is now. So much of it is international. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to do a lot of cooperative work and collaboration with other countries recently. Have you done anything international yet? Or are you looking to do that?
Not yet, at least not as far as like the research side of it goes. I would love to do international collaborations. I think that would be really awesome to do. I've done some international, just like outreach events, and I've done a few of those at TU. So I guess that's kind of my scale of international collaboration. But I would love to collaborate with research internationally. I think that would be so cool.
That's also one of those things where you never know when it might happen. You'll be doing something and all of a sudden you'll be like, oh, here's a fellowship, or here's an opening, at a university or something. You never, know necessarily. You can't always plan on it. It's one of those things where you see the door, you got to open it if that's what you want to do.
Oh yeah.
So that's one of the reasons I like becoming a teacher, was because I've traveled a lot internationally, and I'm like, you know what? If I really want to, I can organize a field trip and go to another country.
Yeah.
I can do that, and I've done that. So, or go someplace else, in the United States. So it does happen. So, I was talking to students today. I usually do. I've been doing this year what I call a scientist profile every day, where I show them a scientist. So, and this is not your scientist that's a dead for 100 years type of person. This is someone that's young, doing research, and is exciting, And we looked at someone today that was doing, field research. And I was talking a little bit about field research and how, if you like to be outside, science in the science fields is a great way to go. And you have options. You can either be outside all the time, like I was when I was in the Forest Service. I was outside every day, all day, pretty much. Or times kind of like probably what you do, where you go out, you do your field research, and then you come back to your lab indoors and you analyze what you got. Could you speak to that at all? Your experience of being in the field versus being in the lab?
Yeah. So for my thesis, we'll go and do field work. We do field work in the summer and winter time, and the summertime is always much nicer than winter time because at least it's really nice to get in the river. Then in the winter, you kind of get in the river in the winter time. It's really cold. Um, and we'll go out and we'll collect samples, and it's really fun and really fun to like get outside and sort of get to see what's going on with the river because um, you're not necessarily local to your field site either. So it's really fun to get out there and sort of see how it looks like. And then when we get back to the lab, getting to do all those analyses and getting data, I really enjoy that part too. I would say I'm kind of like half lab rat, half field person. Like I enjoy both equally and enjoy both equally for different reasons. Like I love being outside, but I also love getting to do all the like chemical analyses and seeing what the data is showing and what's there, and then getting to sort of like model it and graph it. It just really, everything about it really excites me and doing that. So that's one of the reasons why I like science so much is it kind of like allows you to do both outdoors and indoors. And then if you like one more than the other, you could just stick to being an outdoors person, or you could just stick to being a lab person. Like whatever kind of like floats your boat, you can choose to do. And I like that.
Yeah, I like when I was growing up and figuring out what I was going to do with my life. I did the Forest Service. So I was outside all the time, and it was fine in the summer. It was only when, and this was at the Allegheny National Forest. I don't know if you were in northern Pennsylvania, and the summer program was over, and they're like, "Well, our next location is northern New Hampshire for this winter." I'm like, wait, you mean I'm going to be walking around in the winter outside in northern New Hampshire? I'm like, oh, look at the time. Like, I mean, the benefit is there wouldn't be any bugs. I don't have to worry about the mosquitoes. But at the same time, I'm like, you know what? That's really not for me. And, the other season was the fire season and going out and fighting fires. And I was like, I don't know if that's for me either. And then I worked in a lab for a few years, which was you're inside all day with no windows. And that I was kind of like, well, this sucks too. Like, I'm like, and that's what I realized, kind of like you're talking about. I want a little bit of both. You're like, I want a little bit outside. I want a little bit of inside. Which I think is perfect. Some people, love being inside. They're homebodies. They want to go out and put on their waders and walk through rivers or anything like that. But some people love that. So I think it's, like you said, not only determining what tack you want to take as far as your education and what you want to learn, but also later in your career figuring out what it is that you like to do. Because sometimes, like I said, I'm a very outdoors person. I thought I would love doing the all outdoors thing, and I was like, no, not me.
Yeah.
Now, do you like collect mussels sometimes, and then do you have to like squash them and grind them to find the metals in them? Is that something you do? Because that sounds kind of gross.
Yeah. So our first batch of mussels we got lucky with. We collaborate with a group at University of Oklahoma, and they had a bucket of mussels they had already collected, and so they had given that bucket to our lab group to work with. So at least for that part, we only had to pry open their shell and take out their tissue and then dry it out, which is it's really disgusting and it smells really bad, and it like the scent stays on you for like a solid week, so you smell like dead mussel for like a week, which isn't the best smell to like have. And then we started collecting mussels in the field, and I can't be the one to like kill them because I like them too much. So it's always generally it's one of my advisors who'll be the one to like kill the mussels, and I like them too much to be the one to do that. I can take them apart like once they're dead and do that part, but like actually killing them, I have a hard time doing that. So
that's funny.
yeah,
Well,
but
So I worked in a lab extracting PCBs from biota. That's the lab I worked in, because the Hudson River is known for its PCBs, and we would grind up mussels and fish and pretty much anything else to see if there's PCBs in it. And yeah, you're right. That smell like sticks on you for forever. I just smelled like fish for like, weeks and weeks and weeks. Oh, my wife says, "You used to smell so bad." Yes, thank you. I did.
Yeah. I had to go to a seminar like right after prying open mussels and like drying things out, and it was in this crowded room because it was like before COVID, and we were all like crowded up together for this seminar, and I had just been like arms, shoulders deep in like dead mussels basically, and I was like, this is so embarrassing, like, guys, it's mussels.
Really? I don't always smell like this. That's when you find out the other researcher, that's doing something just as disgusting, and you're like hanging out with them, and then the two of you can like, no, it's not me, it's him. He does the squid research. That guy.
Oh yeah, yeah. I need to find someone I can like blame. That's like, no, it's that.
No, it used to be my wife always jokes. I would come home and she'd just tell me to change clothes and take a shower. It was that type of job. But not only that is, I would imagine besides the mussels, the mud itself can really stink too. Almost as bad as worse. I mean, once it starts decomposing, the living things are gross. But the mud is basically just decomposing, biotic material. That's gross too.
Oh yeah, yeah. I've uncapped like samples that we've collected out there, and the first time I uncapped that, I was naive. I wasn't expecting it, so I just uncapped like, yeah, it's fine. And then the scent hit me. I was like, it's not fine. Like, you need to do this in a vented area. And I was like, it just smelled so bad. I was like, this is even worse than the mussel. So yeah,
luckily
now I
uncap
in vented areas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that that teachers know this. Science teachers, I've been doing it for a while, know this, and I tell students, I'm like, the best ventilation you can have is outside. If there's anything that's going to smell, just do it outside. It save us all the time. But it's I tell students often, I'm like, science smells very often, whether it's chemistry or biology, it's always full of smells. And those are some of the observations you make about what you do, right? Sometimes a smell can indicate, something specifically, like decomposition, would be the case with those smells, which are not pleasant.
Yeah.
So have you spoken to a lot of student groups so far, or are you just kind of getting into that?
Yeah, I've spoken to a lot of student groups. I did a lot of in-person stuff before COVID, and then when COVID happened, it kind of had to transition to be more virtual, which was kind of a more bumpier start because I really hadn't done virtual outreach before, so kind of getting into that was kind of bumpy, but I got into it relatively quickly, like kind of after sort of trying to figure out how virtual works, and now I've been like zooming into classrooms and meeting up with student groups in different states, so that's been fun.
Well, that's how Skype a Scientist works. I mean,
yeah, I've been doing that, and had some teachers, at least in Oklahoma, ask if I can like zoom in with them and talk about like water quality related to stuff they have, or even like because we're allowed to do like in-person field trips here as long as like we all socially distance. So I've done some of those for some teachers, like met them outdoors at a river and gone through some water tests.
All right, that's cool. I do have I'm not going to have you come out to New York State or anything, but we do have a river or a stream that goes it's not on school property. It's like just the other side. of the school, down in a little ravine in the woods. So I've taken students down there mainly look when I've done earth science to look at erosion and meandering of streams and stuff. But I've been wanting to do some more, field work down there as far as water quality and stuff. So I'm actually going to look into contacting one of our local experts on that. Because the other interesting fact about our school is we have a landfill right next door.
Oh, nice.
Oh, yeah. So there could be some interesting data there.
Oh, yeah. You're probably going to get some really interesting results.
Hopefully not too interesting, because that'd be bad.
Yeah, that would be bad, but landfills are always interesting with, like, the water system nearby.
Yeah. It is only a construction debris landfill, but still, a landfill's a landfill. Not always good. Or actually, never good, I should say that. And qualify that. So you enjoy, what are some of the best questions that kids have asked you? That you're kind of like, oh my gosh, that is a very good question. Or, that is so funny.
I think some of the best questions I've been asked have to do with water quality. Like they'll ask about how if you're in a different ecoregions, like whether it's mountainous or sort of more like a flatter region, like a plain, whether that has any contributions to water quality at all, and also like whether the seasonality changes have any contributions to water quality, and even like with today with Sky for Scientists, a lot of the students, like they knew I asked them a question, I was like, what do you guys think about this? And they knew the answer, and it completely like blew me away because this was like really upper level science stuff we were talking about, and they just blew me away with what they knew about water quality.
That's good to hear.
Even some interesting questions, I think, has been like, what do you dislike the most about science? Just because no one has ever asked me that question before. So when a student asked that, I was like, I actually had to think about that because like no one's ever asked me what I don't like about science. It's always been, what do you like, or what's interesting about it, and not like, oh, what do you not like about this? So that was an interesting
what was your
question. Answer? My answer was like the cleaning and the writing. I don't know. I just like getting data and then making figures with it or doing like programming with it. I've kind of always struggled with writing, so it's not my favorite thing to have to do. And then cleaning up in the lab, I just like being able to do experiments, so I almost consider cleaning like a blockade sort of thing, but it has to get done in order to do more experiments.
Yep. So like one of the misconceptions I know my students have about like rivers is like the Hudson River, not always clean, but it's always silty, right? It's a silty river. And they think just because it's muddy or silty that it's not healthy. And and this is some misconception that they think all water, if it's perfect, is just clear. I'm like, no, a healthy river is supposed to have some sediment and some mud in it. I mean, that's just the way a river works. And so that's one of the things, that, we talk about, especially when I do an earth science class, that they tend to have that misconception. Have you seen that before in kids? I'm just curious if it's just my kids.
Yeah, I've seen that misconception, at least in thinking that, yeah, I've seen that. That was something that was brought up today as well, and it's been brought up a lot, is at least in a lot of the classrooms I'll like zoom into or talk with and do field stuff with. It'll be a common question of whether like all this sediment or mud that we see, like whether that means that it's not a healthy river or not.
Yeah. And then I remind them that, some places like the Delta of New Orleans, that wouldn't exist without all the sediment in Mississippi. I mean, literally, the only places would not be there if they didn't have sediments. So it's so that's just this concept of clean, being good. Clean isn't always good. Sometimes, yes, clean is good as far as like disinfecting, making sure we're not spreading disease, right? But sometimes in science you realize clean can be bad when you're looking at biodiversity.
Oh yeah. It's like at least with one of the rivers that I study, the headwaters of it, and before we reach an impoundment of it, the water is really clear and like this crystal clear blue color, and it looks really pretty. You can see the bottom of the river. It's amazing, but there was also higher metal content there, and higher than we found it like a dirt at like, I guess like a more murky spot. So even though it was like crystal clear and looked really clean, it actually wasn't what we would consider clean as far as metal content goes in the river.
That'd be an interesting, I'm thinking in my head about that'd be an interesting like way to introduce it to students, is have like 2 cups of water, right? One that's really muddy, but it's fairly safe to drink, right? It's just a little muddy, and one that's perfectly clear, and it looks like it could have just come out of the tap because it could have lead in it, right? Which one is safer to drink? You don't know. That's the trick.
Oh yeah.
Don't drink either.
Yeah.
Boil it first, at least.
Yeah. As far as what's so fascinating about rivers is because they can look really pretty and they could be really terrible as far as water quality goes. So I'm like, you can't just rely on the aesthetic value of this river. Like, you actually have to look at what the chemistry is saying too, because that stuff you can't see with your eyes.
Yep, and that's also a problem I have with students, is trying to get them to think at that molecular level. I mean, not many people understand that parts per million or parts per billion, and how that something of that small of a concentration can have a deleterious effect, on ecosystems or your health even. And so it's really hard to, even myself, I think about it, I'm like, really 1 part in a billion? And it's gonna, but when you think of how many parts there are within even just one glass, then you kind of, start to see what it is. Hey, Uncle Bill, thanks for stopping in. Uncle Bill's not my actual uncle, by the way. He just goes by Uncle Bill in the chat. He's lurking there, hanging out. Thanks for being here. But it is like trying to get kids to understand that molecular level, that how, yes, there's tiny things that you can't see. And it is an abstract concept that, especially small children might have some trouble with, but sometimes they have less trouble because they have the imagination to be able to, to imagine those things. So, that's always been, as an educator, that's what I find challenging. Now, you are kind of you're a science communicator. You're getting into education, and I know you've been a lab assistant, TA a while. You see education in your future as like a part of your career?
Yeah, my dream job is to become a tenured professor at a university so that I can do research as well as teach. And I want to have a really large lab group and do like a lot of collaborative research in pretty much anything related to like river systems and biogeochemistry and hydrology, just something with that and do that. So yeah, that's my dream job. That's my goal.
Yeah. Awesome. That's a good goal, and it's an attainable goal too, because you're doing the right thing. Gamer JM, what do you think about what's happening in US? I knew someone was gonna come in and start chatting about the US. I'll start off by saying that Lauren and I were talking earlier about one of the things we like about science is that it reduces chaos. You want it to be predictable, reasoned, and logical, and you can break it down into pieces. So politics, no, that is not. It always seems like complete chaos to me. So that's my thoughts are I don't like it. Politics in particular, I don't like talking about it because I know quite a bit about it. I consider myself an informed citizen, but I prefer the logic that's involved in science. And I'll let Lauren either say I don't want to talk about it, or she can say something.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I like the logic and like reasoning behind science, and that it is predictable, and that you can base things off of it and make like predictions off of it that in a lot of cases can turn out to be true. So I really like that about science. And, I talked with policymakers about water issues in Oklahoma, and like been trying to have like discussions about like what we can do to sort of better Oklahoma water quality. And it's substantially different than just doing the research, because you kind of don't know what curveball like they're going to throw at you, or whether they're going to be interested or not, and how they're going to take it. And it's like a completely different ball game than doing scientific research. So I like science.
Right. And I think, there was a time when, science and politics was like completely separate, and it was like, science is doing sciencey things, and, politicians and lawmakers are doing their own thing. And ever since, well, I think before World War II, but particularly with like the Manhattan Project and all that, and more government funded research, things have gotten a lot more intertwined. Everything's kind of meshed together, and I think climate change really kind of, forced the two worlds to try to cooperate in a way that they're really not getting along, at least in this country. So, well, I think you might have reached the text limit on my posts. It reads like a rant. You've lost the faith long ago. Well, whatever. I hear you, and I think a lot of people are just very passionate about how they feel about that. Personally, I think there used to be a time also when more people put their faith in science and in trusted scientists, and I don't know if it's a matter now of not having as scientifically literate public. I mean, which is kind of why we're here talking science, so we can kind of show that science isn't like this evil thing that's out to convince you something that's not true or whatever, where we have like this secret agenda. All these scientists are a cabal, and they get together and try to pass policy. Nah, most scientists are like you, Lauren, where they're just kind of like, I just want to get a lab and do some research, and get tenured. I really don't want to have to worry about protecting my funding on Capitol Hill from people that deny climate change or whatever. It's not something that I think scientists really want to get involved in, but sometimes they're kind of forced into that situation. I don't know if you kind of want to add to that, Lauren. I see you nodding your head.
Yeah, it gets kind of, I guess, I mean, I don't have as much experience as other scientists as far as getting involved in like advocating for more funding and doing that, but at least in my experiences in like doing that this year, it kind of does get a bit annoying, like having to do that, or even like having to ask for that, because at least the research that we're asking for funding for is to benefit the community and kind of like Earth in general, and to make these advances. So I think there's a lot of us that kind of get frustrated or annoyed that we have to ask that these things that would be good for society like actually get funded.
Mm-hmm. And it's also, you know, one of the general, and I have friends that are in the boat of, you know, strict physical conservatives that look at some science research and like, why is this research on worm sex being funded by the government? You know, and it's like you don't understand how science works. That basic research is what later leads to breakthroughs in medicines and treatments and bettering society. It's not just funding that specific cancer research. What they are doing is based on research on, you know, primates, which is based on research on, you know, mice and rodents, which is based on research on Drosophila, which is based on research on worms. You know, you know, and so I think that's one of those pieces of misconceptions people have, is that you're just funding this research because it's you know, what's it for? You know, it's just, you know, just funding some professor's paycheck. I'm like, basic research is a foundation of the great institutions we have in America. That's why people come here to go to school, because of that, a lot of that basic research. And if you got rid of that, guess what? Some other country is going to start doing it, and they'll reap the benefits of that basic research. You know?
Yeah. So
that's a little rant on my part.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, even with water quality, like the standards that we have set for like drinking water and for aquatic life criteria and for human health criteria, like that's all been set based off of studies that have been done studying these water systems and then sort of monitoring and seeing the effect on aquatic ecosystems and seeing the effect on humans. And so we kind of have these standards in place now, like based off of that. So like, if that research wasn't funded, then I have no idea what our water quality standards would be. Right. Like, we wouldn't have that baseline to go off of.
Right, you got to get it from somewhere.
Yeah.
And whether it's a government-funded study or a privately funded study, you know, that research, you know, does have to, you know, come from someplace to kind of find out what water quality standards we should have. And I don't think anyone would deny that we should have some form of water quality standard. Because I think a lot of people don't realize how dangerously close we are to not having a lot of potable fresh water. Some places are worse than others, but you could be in a place like, you know, New York or Oklahoma and have issues with water quality. We have areas of New York where you can't drink the water because stuff got into the groundwater, into the rivers, and guess what? You got to build these huge treatment plants now. And do you think the awareness is increasing, Lauren? Do you think people are becoming more aware of water quality issues?
I think so. I think there's a growing movement, or at least a growing something related to water quality, and like more people are becoming aware and more vocal about water issues, and especially like in their local communities. And I know at least in Oklahoma, the water movement has kind of been ramping up with a lot of different communities in different regions of Oklahoma who all have their own different water quality issues, have all started kind of trying to join forces together and then advocate to the same people together about fixing the problems that they're having. And that's been working out pretty good, like combining. So yeah, I think it's growing, and I'm glad to see it growing, because there's new emerging stuff, like with more research done with like PFAS and with microplastics. So we're adding in more stuff than what we had kind of started out with. So I think it's kind of cool that the whole water quality is getting more attention, and I hope it like continues to grow.
Yeah, I think it will. I think people are becoming more attuned, whether it's through climate change And I think before it was kind of like, oh, that's happening someplace else. I don't have to worry about it here. But I think now it's happened in so many places that it's kind of like, are we next? Versus it won't happen here. It's like, when is it going to happen here? When am I not going to be able to have, potable water? And I think that there's kind of that fear. I think one of the things that I see often in politics in as it relates to science is it's reactionary often instead of proactive. It's, oh, we have this problem, now we have to deal with it, versus how do we prevent this from happening in the first place? And I don't know the answer to that, because it's hard to pass policy based on something you think will happen.
Yeah. And like, that's kind of something we've seen in Oklahoma, because like in central Oklahoma, one of the largest aquifers that they have has been polluted due to like just kind of a lot of industry use. So now it's to the point where it would be more of a financial burden to kind of filter or clean that groundwater supply than to just take water from another region of Oklahoma. So there's been a lot of like diversion projects proposed and approved to take water from other regions in Oklahoma to bring it to that specific central Oklahoma region, rather than like trying to clean out the groundwater. But then that's posing problems to the regions that are then having their water diverted to another region, because now they have less water available for them to use, and which also then affects like the aquatic ecosystem. So it's kind of all reactionary. And there's rivers in northeast Oklahoma that even the EPA is like, do not digest or recreate in this river. Like, that is a big no-no. Like, don't do that. So, and then kind of like to sort of mitigate for that, it's like, okay, well, we'll take water from another area and bring it in, but then now that area then has water problems. So it's kind of all this reactionary thing, at least, going on in Oklahoma.
And the problem is, eventually you run out of places to get water from, and then you have to build your huge reverse osmosis filtration plants and everything else that are going to cost a lot of money. So my thing is, I always think, just build the plant to filter what you got where you're at, if you have to, versus the transportation of bringing it in and everything else. That's just contributing greenhouse gases anyways. That's my opinion. We had similar thing with the Hudson River and the PCBs, that General Electric is like dredging the river, but the concern was, well, if you dredge the river, you're going to stir up the sediment with the toxins in it. Shouldn't you just leave it there? Of course, that's what GE said. I'll just leave it there. It's covered. It's not, going to go anywhere now. And it's like, well, what if it's one of those 1 in 100-year floods and it churns up the sediments in the bottom? Then you would have a problem. So there was, it's one of those debates where I was like, I kind of see both sides. But I'm usually in favor of cleanup and get it out. Personally. Because the last thing you need is another Superfund site just sitting around, not being treated. So I think every state and every community has its own Superfund at this point, which is kind of sad, really.
Yeah, we have one in northeast Oklahoma. It's kind of like a tri-state one, because it's in Kansas, or at least it kind of covers Kansas, northeast Oklahoma, and then a little bit of Arkansas. And I've actually helped a high school class do some water testing with the Superfund site, and it was insane. Like, we had to dilute the water samples a lot in order to get accurate like metal readings for the metal concentrations. It was crazy. It
was that far off the charts. It was like, well, can't read it yet, too much.
Yeah, it just came out as saturated. So in order to like get an actual number we could quantify and use, we had to keep diluting the water samples until we finally got a number, and then we had to go through and like back calculate based off of how many dilutions we've done and figure out what the concentration was. But that was kind of crazy, coming from the rivers that at least that I've studied haven't come up with saturated for metals, and then this one was saturated. Like, okay, now we have to dilute and dilute and dilute it so we can get accurate metal readings. Yeah.
Wow, those kids had an education that time.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. So, will you ever drink this water? No. No. Not gonna do it. So, wow. Well, we avoided some politics on our discussion. I think we had a good discussion about policy as it relates to fresh water and maintaining drinking water, which I've talked about a lot with other guests as well. It's a very common thing because it's very much connected to climate change as well, which is a very important topic we've talked about. Now, at the end here, you're the first guest I want to play. I have a game that I want to play with you. This is Twitch, so we play games. And so you're an expert on mussels. And so I'm going to ask you 3 questions about mussels, but not the mussels in the river, the mussels on your body. Okay?
Oh,
and
no.
So it's kind of good. It's going to be, one of them is going to be a right answer, of course, and the other will be wrong. So yeah, your first question, if you're ready. You ready?
Okay. I'm ready.
Which did Khloe Kardashian say in regards to building muscles? Was it, "Hi, baby abs, I see you. I hope to meet your other ab friends soon. Yes, I'm talking to my muscles. I've never met most of them before." Okay, that was A. B. "Oh, look at you, my muscly muscles, making me so sexy." Or C. Lift. "Are you crazy? Get calluses? No." So which was it? A, B, or C? A, "Hi, baby abs." B, "Oh, look at you, my muscly muscles." Or was it lift? "Are you crazy?"
I am not very familiar, or at least I don't follow the Kardashians a lot, so I'm just gonna guess, and I'm gonna guess A.
You are right. Ding, 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 ding. Very good. Seriously, you got it. "Hi, baby abs, I see you."
Oh my gosh. Oh, that was.
All right. Next one, again about building muscles. Which did Ellen DeGeneres say about weightlifting?
Oh no.
A, "I heard lifting could add 10 years to my life. I feel 10 years older already." B, "My favorite exercise in the gym is judging." Or C, "I really don't think I need buns of steel. I'd be happier with buns of cinnamon."
I'm gonna also say that I also don't follow Ellen DeGeneres very much either, so I'm gonna come out and guess again, and I'm gonna guess C.
C, correct. You're cheating somehow. It is C.
Really?
"I really don't think I need buns of steel. I'd be happier with buns of cinnamon."
Oh man.
They all sound like something. That's why I chose them. They all sounded something like Ellen would say. So that's why I chose those. Uncle Bill playing along at home. All right, last one. All right, these last questions to finish this up. All right. Which fact about muscles is false? All right, so one of these 3 statements is false. The other 2 are true. They're like 2 truths and a lie. Okay?
Okay.
A, if humans were capable of hearing frequencies lower than 20 hertz, we would hear our muscles moving. B, all of the muscles working together can lift 25 tons. C, studies have found that drinking beer before workouts helps reduce soreness.
C.
C, of course that's false. God, everyone would be talking. I'll be drinking before we work out. Actually, when I made these up, this is my first time doing this. I thought it'd be fun to ask people about something related but completely unrelated to their field of study. So you win. Awesome. You got 3 out of 3 right on this. Good job. Nice work. Nice. The last one was tough to write. I'm like, I got to make it factual, but not overly factual.
Oh yeah, so, yeah. I was concerned, and then I heard C, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna go with C.
Awesome. Well, thank you for playing the game, and thank you for being a guest tonight on Connected Conversation on Science Streams. I appreciate it. My last request is if you know any other people, graduate students, scientists, researchers that would like to just stop in and chat with me, please send them my way. I'm looking for people to fill out dates in January still, as well as the rest of the year. My goal is to have conversations the rest of the school year. But thank you very much. I think it was a great conversation. I had so much fun. And I always learned so much.
Thanks for having me.
And now you've been on Twitch, so that's just something else that you can add to your resume or something. So, well, thank you very much, and we will say good night to everyone else, and have a great rest of your week, Lauren.
Thank you. You too.
All right, and goodbye.